Hi, everybody, and I want to welcome all of you to our next series, which is Define All Odds, in which we talk about people in the accessibility space. But before I go with that, I want to lead in with this. I know there's a lot of things going on around our country. I know we just witnessed, or rather, we heard about the shootings going on in various parts of our countries. And so I want to take the time to make sure that everyone is focusing on their mental health. When we talk about community, we talk about uplifting people, and I hope people are not only in the position to give, but to receive, because you can't just want to give help. You need to receive help. And in this trying time, if we don't have each other's back, no one else will. So I hope we're all banding together, just as, Black, Latinx, we're banding together and really supporting each other through this time. And I just wanted to make sure I lean in that. Y'all, I love y'all, support it. And I hope that y'all reach out to everybody and y'all make sure to just ask people and let them know how you need support and how you can support them. But with that being said, let's lead into the series. So welcome to Define All Odds, which is an accessibility and tech careers series. Greetings, family. My name is Dominique, and I'll be your host today. We have some of our lovely people here, or rather a great guy who's going to be talking to you about what he does in the accessibility space and how he goes around making sure everyone is inclusive in this role. But before we get into that, I just want y'all to take a moment to share. I want y'all to take a moment to connect with each other in LinkedIn. Tell us where you're tuning in from. I'm in Brooklyn, New York, the best place in the best city. I hope y'all all, tell us where y'all from and really connect with each other. This month, we're celebrating Accessibility Awareness Month with some of the great Black designers. I see you, Chanel, tuning in from NYCCCC. And so before we get a little further, we would like to know where you are in your tech journey. Are you in school, in boot camp, or self-learning? Are you applying for your first role? Or are you growing and glowing in your career? We want you to know wherever you are supported, you are loved, and we want to see you get it because we're all trying to make it. And you got all the support in this community. So have you visited our Referral Zone? We have so many different companies here and here's the link to it, by the way, bit.ly/MMC/refers. We have many different companies where we're trying to help people get jobs. People from these companies rather have reached out to us. We have Amazon, we have Zillow, we have Microsoft. And I know that says Microsoft Atlanta, but if you can apply anywhere. They're hiring all over the country. Please take some time, go to the link. Please just go through. We want to help y'all get these jobs. Once again, here's the link right here. I'll leave that up for a couple of seconds. And so before we get into this, I want to take some time for y'all to, really get to know the team, to talk a little bit about the mentorship program we're bringing up very soon, to how to opt into our text reminders, a little bit about our Etsy shop, and finally, our Accessibility Month giveaway. So welcome. This is just some of the team. We have our lovely CEO, Miss Make It Happen herself, Chanel. She's a founder. She's the reason we're able to put on all these events and get you this information all free of charge. We have Javon, who is our COO, and she has a tech series where she documents her journey into tech from being a teacher into now. You should really check it out. We're always trying to post those YouTube links and give her views. You have me. I'm the Chief Strategy and Business Officer here to make these people look good and, get this business rolling. And then we have Brooklyn, who is our Community and Impact Manager. She helps us with all the feedback and how to tune these events just for y'all to make them all lovely. And a couple of more people. We have Sade, who does a lot of graphic design work, and she does a lot of design for our Etsy shop. A lot of what we see people buy are her designs. She's really dope. We have Kiara, who's an event content curator. You'll see her hosting here when she has the time. And and I'm saying that jokingly, she always has time for us. And then you have Sharika, who's a user experience engineer. We have a lifestyle brand on our website, and she does a lot of content for that. And if you're seeking to join us, please visit bit.ly/MMC-team and just set the volunteer inquiry with me. I promise y'all, I won't bite your heads off. And guess what? Our mentorship program is launching, folks. That's right. We want you to take some time and come to the link right here. It's on our website, but if you can, take a snapshot. Go to mentormecollective.org/mentorship. That program is launching very soon. We're actually going to be opening up registration for it. You'll be paired with some of the greatest tech minds. You'll get free mentorship and you'll get free career coaching and that will really help you on your journey. And so, are you interested in being a fellow for the program? Please go to bit.ly/MMC-mentee. Right there, the link is, I just put it up for y'all right here. We really want y'all to participate. I'm telling you, you have some people who are giving you the greatest information for the free. It costs you no charge. This is just to help you, the community. And this is how to opt into our text reminders. All you need to do is text MMC to 866-901-1914. We don't spam you. We only want to talk to you about our events and our giveaways. That's it. This is our Etsy shop. Remember how I told you about Sade? A lot of her designs go on here. She did an amazing job designing for Accessibility Month. And I really hope y'all take the time to go and just look at it. Trust me, there'll be something for all of y'all. So if you go to Etsy shop, if you go to etsy.com/shop/Mentor Me Collective, you'll be able to check out all the wares. But what's an MMC event without a MMC giveaway? That's right, folks. We still want to make sure we're giving away to the community. And so this is how you can, start and get involved with the giveaway. You could take a picture on our photo booth, which will be coming up shortly. And we really want y'all to take pictures. Like, trust me, the filters are dope. Grab your pen and take notes, connect with us on all social media platforms, and complete our online quiz. And this is just a little bit deeper knowledge. Again, take your camera, your phone's right here, scan that QR code. I'm also going to share a link that we have up here. Please, please, please take a photo on this photo booth. I will literally wait for a whole minute for y'all to take some photos and upload it to us. Again, take notes to complete our online quiz. Visit our Instagram and post and tag 3 friends. And finally, text MMC to 866-901-1914. Once again, this is the snapshot. All you're going to do is take your smartphone. We all got one at this point. You're going to scan that QR code. You're going to click it, and you're going to use it to take a picture, and you can share it with us. Please, y'all. We really want to see y'all beautiful faces. A lot of dope filters. A lot of dope filters on here. And here are some of the giveaway prizes. Some Apple AirTags. I heard those are lit. A HomePod Mini. A Hydrate water bottle. Because we all need our water. That's how we function throughout the day. We all really need that. And now need light bulbs are here. They have sensational lighting. So if you're trying to brighten up your room, please take that time. But again, y'all didn't come to hear me talk and ramble on. Y'all hear from the main series. So I would like to bring up the guest of the night, the hostess with the mostest, Mr. Raheem. How you doing, sir?
Thank you, Dom. I'm doing well. Can you hear me well?
Yeah, we can hear you just fine.
Cool. Thank you so much. I'm happy to dive in. Is there anything that you want me to check before I start sharing?
You know what? Could you just tell the people a little bit about yourself before we dive in? I know you'll tell them a little bit more later, but I want people to see who you are first.
Yeah, no, thank you. First of all, shout out to you. Shout out to Chanel. She looped me into this amazing event. Thank you so much for keeping me in mind and giving me the opportunity to participate and give back, and obviously talk a little bit more about accessibility, because it definitely is part of software engineering and IT and things like that, but it's definitely not as sexy as some of the other fields that we work in, like AI and ML. But and a very, very critical and integral part of creating and designing user experiences. So I'm happy to talk about that today and answer any questions that anyone may have on that. In terms of me, I'm currently an accessibility engineer at Apple, a senior accessibility engineer. So every day I get to work with creating inclusive user interfaces, creating experiences that can be used by people of all abilities, and also leveraging some of my technical skills to make sure that we're doing things in a way that is usable by people with disabilities that use assistive technologies as well. Wow. So I've been working in accessibility. I have a slide about this, but happy to dive into it now. I've been working in accessibility for about a decade now. I started off in computer science, so I've done the sort of development engineering side, and so accessibility is just it's kind of like a sub-discipline of development and engineering. So how do we develop content that's usable by people that use a keyboard, or people that use a screen reader, or some other assistive technology that augments their ability to use a computer, right? And it enables them to use a computer or device in a particular way. So yeah, we're going to get into all of that in just a moment.
You see, so welcome. I'm going to take myself off stage. I want Raheem to have the full floor. Make sure that y'all drop in emojis. Y'all have questions ready, because he has a lot of great content for y'all.
Cool. Thank you, Don. Cool. So my presentation today, I put together some slides, very informal. I would like to talk about what accessibility is, give you some background information about me, maybe even demo some of the assistive technologies that people use. And because I work at Apple, obviously I'm going to demo the things that are built into Apple operating systems. And then talk a little bit about what do I do on a day-to-day basis? What are some of the avenues to move into an accessibility-focused career? And then obviously field any questions that y'all may have. Yeah, let's go ahead and dive in. I think I have about 30 minutes to talk through this stuff. So my full name is Abdul Rahim. I am originally from East Africa. I came here when I was real young, like in my early teens. I'm old now, getting older. But I originally born and raised in Somalia. I came here, learned English. Obviously, coming from a war-torn country, our country's getting better now in terms of kind of centralized government and a sense of organization that we didn't have. Our country collapsed in 1993. I was real young. We had to leave there. And so I've had the opportunity of moving around a bit when I was young, but eventually settled in America, in Columbus, Ohio originally, currently living in San Jose, California, but lived in Columbus, and that's where I did my undergrad and graduate degree in computer science. From a young age, I loved computers. I remember my dad, he bought us a computer, and I remember learning to type on it and doing very, very basic programming using QBasic. If anyone remembers QBasic, like writing simple input statements and getting input from the keyboard and echoing it out, and kind of understanding that computers were the future. I was really appreciative that my dad bought us a machine and he was able to catch this wave real early. He understood that the web was going to be important. He understood that not only desktop computers, but also portable computers, what are now phones and iPads and devices, mobile devices, would become integral to the ethos of how we interact with the world, right? And I really appreciate that I had that opportunity when I was younger. But I've been living in San Jose for the past about 2.5 years. After I graduated, I worked at the Ohio State University, which is where I went to school at. Got a chance to work in private sector as well. So I worked at Chase for several years, and that's when I moved to San Jose, where I've been living. So my career progression has been kind of doing IT engineering stuff. So I was a systems specialist / engineer at the very beginning, doing like systems administration, networking stuff, a little bit of DevOps and programming. And then I moved into more of an accessibility analyst role right after that. Once I got a taste of actually performing accessibility analysis. So, I have an application or a website, and someone asks me, hey, you need to test this for accessibility, surface all the issues that you may find, and provide this report to someone and provide them with the recommendations on how to make it inclusive. That was when it dawned on me that, this is really a marriage of all the things that I love. I love diversity and inclusion. I love computer science, but I also love front-end technologies as well, things like the web and native applications. So I knew, as I was telling Dom just now, I knew that I wanted to do something I was passionate about, marrying all these interests that I have. And accessibility was it was a perfect intersection of all the things that I enjoy, and allowed me not only the technical outlet. I'm sure many of you would sort of resonate with your desire to do, you want to learn technologies, you want to be on the cutting edge and understand how these technologies work and how they can be implemented and deployed, and understanding kind of the nitty-gritty details. But at the same time, sometimes that can get lost in what's the ultimate user experience. And that's where accessibility is such an amazing discipline, because all you think about in accessibility is the UI. What is the experience? Who's using it? Is it usable? What are the blockers? How do you fix them? So that's when I got to really thrive in that role, and my love of accessibility and UI and engineering really became concretized. It really came to the forefront. And then from there, as I developed more maturity in front-end technologies and development, but also serving as an SME, a subject matter expert in accessibility, I was able to really advance kind of not only my own knowledge and experience in accessibility, but also get experience in working in different environments. So I was thankfully very fortunate enough to be recruited by Apple. I went through like 100 million interviews, but eventually I was able to get a job offer, and that's when I moved out here and started my career here. So what I do now is, as we'll talk about in a bit, very, very diverse roles and responsibilities as it relates to providing accessibility support, understanding accessibility standards and conformance criteria, and how that bears on making sure that content is inclusive. So we want to make sure that we create inclusive experiences, but at the same time, there's a legal aspect to accessibility as well, which is that content must meet the accessibility requirements. It's a civil right, it's a human right, but it's also a legal right as well. So people can get sued if their content's not accessible, if their websites and apps and things like that aren't accessible. We'll talk about that more in just a moment. Just one fun fact about me, I am like super duper hip hop head. Like I love hip hop music. It's one of the things that I gravitated to a lot when I came to America. So hip hop culture, specifically like, 80s, 90s hip hop, which is the stuff that I grew up on. Like I can't tell you how much of a head I am. Like I love it. Favorite artists, Nas, Wu-Tang, Mobb Deep, mostly East New York stuff, which I think Dom and Chanel already know very well. But yeah, I'm a super, super big hip hop fan, and I love and just adore hip hop culture. I talked a little bit about my role, but just to dive more into sort of my day-to-day work. So obviously I'm doing accessibility engineering stuff. So, working with developers, designers on creating inclusive UI. And part of that might be, creating specifications for like a complex component. Like let's say that someone's building a menu. And when you activate the trigger for the menu, there's an overlay that appears that has options inside of it. Users can navigate that with a keyboard. Users can open the menu, they can close the menu. How might this work and be spec'd out for people that use voice control? If they control the computer with the sound of their voice, or people that are just using a keyboard alone, or maybe even a screen reader like Voiceover, which I'm going to demonstrate in just a moment. So creating specifications and understanding how these technologies work is a big understanding how components should work and widgets should work, and UI generally should expose itself to different types of users and how they interact with it is a big part of what I do. Creating prototypes of some of these interactions and giving them to people that may not understand accessibility. So if I'm working with someone and they say, how might this accordion work for someone who is blind? So maybe I might create a prototype and actually demonstrate how it might work with Voiceover. Developing tools and APIs and things like that that could be consumed by others. So a good example of that might be like a color contrast analyzer tool. So our team owns that tool within Apple internally. So we develop it, it's a macOS application. It's used by designers particularly to determine and gauge the color contrast of content. And for accessibility, we want to make sure that color contrast is sufficient because people with visual disabilities might not perceive that content. If it doesn't meet the required threshold, then it's very difficult for those users to perceive and understand that content. You need just to see it, right? If it doesn't have good contrast, it's difficult to see. A user with a disability might not even know it's there. So that's not very inclusive and definitely is a serious accessibility barrier. I get to do some development, but I get to do a lot of SME work. So I would say that my dev SME ratio is probably 30 to 70%. I'd like to do more dev, but internally, as Chanel knows, we have a lot of devs at Apple. Everyone has dev skills. So a lot of times it's what else can you do besides development? So it's not necessarily that you're a great rock star developer. It's that, do you have niche skills or expertise in a specific thing that you could then build maturity in others and help others to achieve that same level of knowledge. So because I've been doing a lot of accessibility work throughout my career, it's what I mostly focus on: helping others understand accessibility, implement accessibility, and sometimes codify it, sometimes to present on it, sometimes even give trainings to other teams on, hey, here's how you should go about your web accessibility practice. You guys create components and UI, etc. Here are all the things that you should be thinking about as you create content and websites and web pages. The title I think that you're seeing is Accessible iOS Engineering, although accessibility really applies to all different types of platforms, not just native applications. So iOS and iPadOS apps have their own sets of accessibility requirements and technologies that we work with. Web is definitely I would say, the most well understood and most mature subdiscipline of accessibility, only because it arose out of web platforms. When in the early days, when HTML and CSS and all these foundational technologies that are managed by the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, when they emerged, there was a need for understanding, well, how do we make these experiences inclusive, right? We're creating tools that allow people to develop, more and more dynamic applications and engaging interactive applications on the web. There has to be ways to think about how to make this content accessible and how to make sure that we're not excluding anyone. So as part of that effort, web accessibility standards sort of took they came to the forefront in general understanding of accessibility. So a lot of the principles and foundational ideas when it comes to accessibility, like making sure there's good color contrast, making sure stuff works from a keyboard, making sure that buttons are labeled for voiceover users. A lot of that comes from the web accessibility field and all the great things that came out of web accessibility. So there's iOS and iPadOS and macOS, those are native apps. There's web, but then there's also documents as well. So when you share a PDF file, for example, there are accessibility considerations for that, or a Word document. There are accessibility considerations for physical devices as well. So these are software, but what about a kiosk, for example? If I'm at Kroger's, or if I'm at Safeway, for example, a grocery store, and there's a kiosk there, how might someone who's blind interact with that kiosk? What if I have a hearing disability? What if I have a motor disability? It's difficult for me to tap on the controls as part of the UI. So accessibility cuts across all different types of computing environments, not necessarily just applications in web and native environments. It can also be physical devices. It could be part of operating systems as well. It could be, you could find accessibility applies to anything digital and physical as well. Just make a quick note on that. We talked about digital accessibility and, what do I think of inside of an application to make it accessible? Physical accessibility is something that's completely different. So, when I was a student, I remember there were some students that, for example, were in wheelchairs. They might submit a request to ensure that a building has an accessible entrance. That's not necessarily what I do. I don't think about physical environments and how to make them accessible. I focus on digital environments and software, primarily in native apps and the web. So anytime you hear about accessibility in a software engineering sense, or from a software engineering standpoint, you're always thinking about and talking about applications and digital content, not necessarily physical accessibility, which is a different type of accessibility for ensuring that physical environments are inclusive for people with disabilities. I talked a little bit about the end users. So who benefits, who consumes the things that I output, right? When I work on a website and I make it accessible, who uses that? Those are primarily people with disabilities. And as I'm sure most of you are already aware, you may or may not have a disability. You may know a family member, a friend that has a disability. Disability is just another part of diversity. There are many people with disabilities all around the world. In fact, it's estimated there's probably roughly 20 to 30% of people in the world that have a disability. The vast, overwhelming majority have invisible disability. So you can't look at someone and determine whether or not they have a disability. Many of them have visual disabilities, and that can range from perhaps being colorblind or maybe having issues with maybe perhaps a visual acuity, to just having low vision, for example. There are a number of people that have hearing disabilities, approximately 500 million, and many people with color blindness as well. One myth about disabilities that I like to dispel is that it's not necessarily something permanent. So many disability types can also be temporary. For example, if I break my arm, I may have a motor disability for 3 months or 6 months. If I'm holding an object, my mobility is decreased, right? If I'm in a loud environment, then it affects my hearing. So you might have subtitles, for example, in a loud bar, if there's a screen with a video. So disabilities can be both temporary and permanent. The vast majority of people with disabilities you wouldn't be able to glean that they have one just by looking at them. Those are probably the two primary takeaways that I'd like you to have from this slide. Accessibility is all about making content usable for people with disabilities. So a lot of what software engineers do, specifically like front-end engineers, what they do is they create UI. And part of that is creating well-designed, logical, intuitive, engaging UI. And usability is part of that. You want to create UI that's usable, right? If there's a button that can't be used with a mouse, that's not a very usable button. Usability, when you apply that same principle to people with disabilities, that's what accessibility is. It's just making sure that UI is usable by people with disabilities. Part of what we do as SMEs in accessibility is that we think about barriers and how to remove them. And so accessibility is both a noun, right? The degree to which something is usable by people with disabilities, but it's also a verb. So I'm going to make this button accessible. I'm going to make this UI, this dialogue, this accordion, this footer region. I'm going to make that accessible. And part of that is removing barriers to access. As I mentioned earlier, accessibility is part of the human condition. We all are likely to experience having a disability as part, in our lifetime. It's a civil, legal, and human right. And accessibility and thinking about usability for people with disabilities benefits everyone. Many of the accessibility principles that you would employ, making sure that contrast is sufficient, making sure that you can interact with content with just your keyboard, making sure that you're not using color alone to convey meaning, because not everyone can perceive color. All these things benefit people of all abilities, not necessarily people with disabilities alone. These are universally sound principles to creating inclusive, engaging UI. Dom, are you still there? Do you want me to just pause to take questions or just continue?
No, we can open the floor up to answers. Yep, I'm still here. So does anyone have any questions? Because as I was listening to this, I had a couple of questions of my own that I would love for you just to answer.
Yep.
Well, as we wait for the audience, so that when it comes to all these different features, what would you say, or rather, what have you learned so much in this space? Like, what's the one thing that you've learned just being in this accessibility space that you want to impart to everybody here?
What I learned? Oh man, where do I start?
We got all this time.
Yeah, I learned that. I would say a couple of things that I learned in my years of working in this field and working in IT. Number one is that it's okay to not know everything. There's a sense that you have to know everything, and as you learn more, one of my favorite expressions, people always, when I talk to people, they always get this idea that, oh, you're the accessibility expert. People say that to me every single day. You're the expert, you're the expert, you're the expert. And one of my favorite quotes is that an expert is someone who knows more and more about less and less. Y'all ever heard that before?
I've heard it once from my grandfather.
Yeah, so the idea is that you're learning more about something but you're actually, in the grand scheme of things, you probably know less, right? So learning, there's this paradoxical relationship between learning more and actually knowing less, because the more that you learn, the more you learn that you actually don't know that much. That's the first thing. And the second thing I would say is that technology changes at a rapid pace. And no one sits you down and says, here's what's new now. Here's a new assistive technology. Here's a new feature as part of a browser. No one provides that information to you. So you have to be very autonomous when it comes to that. And you have to really, it's not, I work from 8 to 5 and I'm done, right? And accessibility, I have to keep up on the news. I have to follow important people in this space. I have to keep up on documentation, from browser documentation, assistive technology documentation. I have to keep up on my dev skills. I have to create things. I have to teach other people how to do it as well. So I have to think about how I can convey information to other people. It's really something that falls on you, and you have to take the onus to continue learning and never stop learning. Right?
And that's something that Chanel has actually told me, because she is my mentor. Tech is something you have to continuously learn. You have to be an avid student, because the minute you stop learning is the minute that you no longer can grow in this industry. And even for accessibility, developing new ways for everyone to be inclusive, everyone to have access to the same technology. I remember seeing something. It was like a thing. A girl who was blind. The iPhone had designed a feature where there was like a little braille setting so that she can type using braille, and it was really cool just to see that feature added on, because that's not something the average person really thinks about. And so, we have a question from Miss Meredith Green, and she asks, "Do you need experience working with individuals with disabilities to work in accessibility?"
Yeah, that's a great question, Meredith. I would say no, because that's one of the first questions you'll get asked. And any accessibility job, it's like, do you have experience working with people with disabilities? And if you haven't encountered people with disabilities yet, that's not something that should be used against you. I think generally all of the knowledge that comes out of learning about web accessibility and digital accessibility doesn't require that you work directly with those users. It requires that you understand the technologies. It requires that you understand what the most inclusive experience is. It requires that you understand standards and maybe some coding and how the web works, but not necessarily that I've sat down next to a blind user and I've seen them use this technology. You can use a screen reader yourself. You don't necessarily have to have someone show you how to do that. You can do testing yourself. You don't have to have someone show you how to do that either. So I would say the answer is no. Now, if you're serious about accessibility, it would definitely behoove you to obviously develop relationships with people that have disabilities, whether it's part of a disability community online or seeking out people with disabilities and understanding their experience when it comes to technology and the barriers that they face and the challenges that they face. And nothing without us about us. I'm sure you've heard that expression before, right? So you can't be an advocate for people with disabilities and work in accessibility without really understanding them. Is it required? I would say no, but I think it's going to take you much further if you engage with that community and people that have disabilities, that have the lived experience when it comes to accessibility.
And that kind of goes into what you were saying before, which is just something that you learn. Like, that's an avid learning thing. Like, you should learn about who you're serving. And in this case, you're serving those who are disabled. So even if it's not required, if you truthfully want to be an asset in this industry and you truthfully want to help these people, you will take the conscious time to learn about them people and what they need.
Right.
And so then I guess my follow-up question to that, just, springboarding off of her for a minute, what are some really innovative things you have seen in this space? I know, like, as technology has grown, we've seen a lot of innovation. So in the accessibility space, what is everyone, or rather, what have you seen done that's really like, wow, like, that's really like, damn, we needed that?
Yeah, there's a feature that just came out in iOS that allows you to highlight text in a picture. Have y'all seen that?
Yeah,
you can actually hold up. Yeah, I think it's like a screen capture feature, and that's it's a small example, Dom, of what you're talking about. But imagine being a person with a disability. You have a cognitive disability, a reading disability, having the ability to, if I see a sign, for example, I hold up my phone and I can highlight it and I can read it out loud, right?
Mm-hmm.
Having those types of things that just improve one's quality of life as a person with a disability, and to just enable more streamlined access to technology and the world around you. Super dope. I think a larger example of that might be like augmented reality, like virtual reality, augmented reality, and thinking about how people with disabilities are going to be navigating these types of environments, and how do you make a simulated environment accessible, right? And I've seen some really cool proposals put forward on how the technologies that we currently have can be adapted to be used in virtual environments, and making sure that if I can't perceive a simulated environment, that I'm able to still navigate it in some way. So I've seen some interesting approaches to how we can make VR accessible. But yeah, those two examples come to mind on things that are really cutting edge that I'm super excited to see how they develop and what their futures are.
I like to hear that, and that's something that I'm very interested in. So as the audience is gathering their questions, feel free. I'm gonna stay on stage with you, but feel free to continue to go to the presentation. Yeah. I'm going to ask questions throughout to kind of help elaborating in those the audience.
Yeah, sounds good. Let me. I'd like to demo some of these technologies that are used for accessibility. I'm not part of the teams that develop these. I work with these teams, but I'm not necessarily like a VoiceOver developer or a Safari developer. So we use these tools in terms of testing. So I would test with VoiceOver like a VoiceOver user would use it. And it just occurred to me that not everyone is going to be aware of what VoiceOver is. I'm going to demonstrate that. But VoiceOver is it's a screen reader. It basically reads aloud what's going on the screen to people that are blind or have visual disabilities. So let me go ahead and share my screen, and we'll walk through very quickly some of the high-level assistive features, and I'll demo VoiceOver just so everyone can see what some of these AT tools look like.
We'll love to see it. As he's gathering that, I hope everyone's enjoying their time. I hope y'all preparing questions, drop some emojis, because Raheem, he's been doing a fantastic job of just everything. Okay.
I appreciate y'all. I see Brooklyn, he just posted, shout out to Tribe Called Quest. Loving you right now.
So let me
Love Tribe.
Let me bring up this other presentation for you.
Thank you. I'm sharing my screen right now, so I just want to share my desktop screen. You're able to see that?
Yeah, we're able to see that. And Brooklyn has a question, but I'll let you do the demo first, and then we'll get to her question.
Got you. Cool. So what I'm going to do is, for those running Mac OS, you can actually follow along or do this yourself. If you're interested to learn more about the assistive technologies and tools that are built into your OS, and these are available on both mobile platforms and also in Mac OS. So you can do this on iOS, iPadOS, and Mac OS as well. But inside of your system preferences, there's an accessibility menu. And when you click on accessibility, you notice on the left-hand side here, there's a number of tools that you can use to change how you interact with your computer. One of them is VoiceOver, which I'm going to demonstrate. That's our flagship assistive technology. And that's used by someone who's blind to navigate UI. You also have Zoom, which basically just magnifies the screen. I have various display settings. I can invert colors. So if I have a visual disability, for example, and light colors are bothersome for me, or they're uncomfortable even, what I can do is I can invert my colors and change the display colors. I'm not sure if that shows up on
we can see. I saw the symbol come up for the invert right here.
Yeah. I can also increase contrast. I can reduce transparency to make things a little bit easier to read and more legible. So yeah, there's plenty of options here that I can toggle, again, as a person with a disability, depending on how I want to personalize my own experience. There are other assistive technologies like voice control that I'd mentioned, and anyone that's used dictation, where you talk to your device and it transcribes what you say. Voice control is similar to that, except you can actually say commands, things like minimize all windows or click on learn more, for example. For someone that is bound to a wheelchair or has a motor disability, maybe it's difficult for them to move their hands. It's easier for them to speak. They can use voice control to navigate and operate their computer. Switch control is another example of that as well. So there's lots of features. I won't go through all of them. Siri is considered to be an assistive technology. Technically, it's a virtual assistant. So you can use Siri to basically do anything. So I've seen, one of my blind friends send text messages. He'll say, open messages, and he'll send a text message using Siri. Cool. So let me open up a web page. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on Voiceover. And Voiceover has speech output. So you can imagine, as a person who's blind or has a visual disability, hearing what's going on allows you to navigate and operate UI. So one of the terms that we typically use when we talk about different navigation styles, you might hear this in the accessibility space, is navigating via a different input modality. And that's just a fancy way of saying, me as a person without a disability, I look at apple.com, I use my mouse to scroll up and down. I can use my keyboard to navigate. What happens if I'm someone who's using a different input modality, voice control or voiceover, or maybe I'm using a braille device like Dom had mentioned earlier. So different input methods are what we consider as part of accessibility. Not everyone has 2 eyes and 2 hands and uses a mouse, right? So voiceover is going to be turned on via command F5. I'm going to turn it on. There's going to be a small black box that you're going to see. You won't be able to hear the output, but you'll be able to read along with what it's actually announcing. So I'm going to turn it on, and I'm going to navigate this page sequentially using VoiceOver, and I'll explain what I did afterwards.
Excited.
Yeah, it actually may be easier if I just explain as I'm doing this, because the output's kind of loud. But what I did was I turned on VoiceOver. When I turned on VoiceOver, you see a black box around the current element that's focused. And that's what a VoiceOver user can currently interact with. So part of VoiceOver navigation is that you're navigating linearly through the UI. As a sighted user, as a person without a visual disability, I can just look at this page and determine its structure, its general overall structure, where the navigation is, where images are and links, etc. The equivalent to that in VoiceOver navigation is listening to what is announced. So, I can see that this link at the top store is a control. I know that if I click on it, something's going to happen because it's in a navigation region. The equivalent to that for VoiceOver users is basically announcing that this thing is a link. And this is called a role in accessibility. This tells a VoiceOver user what the purpose of this control is, right? You can imagine that there's different types of roles. There's links, which perform navigation. There's buttons, things that perform actions. There's images. There's menu items. There's all sorts of different roles that help VoiceOver users navigate and understand UI. There's also things that are not visual. For example, this iPhone 13 Pro text looks larger to me as a person that can see it and perceive it visually. What I can do as a developer is I can actually code this so that it conveys that this is actually a heading. So the only thing in the visual experience that tells me that this is a heading is that it's larger than the rest of the text, right? So what happens if I heading navigate to that item? What does VoiceOver read aloud? Yeah, you see how you'll see at the speech output box at the bottom right, it reads aloud heading. And heading tells the VoiceOver user, hey, this is a section title for some content. So headings are important because they partition parts of the page. They organize the structure of the page so that users can understand them. They're extremely important in the VoiceOver experience because that's how VoiceOver users can navigate and understand the structure as well. In fact, what I can do is I can pull up a list of all of the headings as a VoiceOver user, and I can quickly jump to the heading that I want. All of this is done via keyboard navigation. So VoiceOver users rely on the keyboard to ensure that they can navigate content in UI. Cool. So I will stop sharing. There's a lot to talk about with VoiceOver, but in a nutshell, it's just a text-to-speech engine that allows blind and people with visual disabilities to navigate UI. It announces content. It allows people to navigate content, allows people to jump to certain parts of the content that they're interested in interacting with, and is a different input method that people that are blind or have a visual disability use in order to navigate UI. So that's VoiceOver in a nutshell.
Oh, I was going to say, and I didn't even know that you could have that small old text box over there, or not small, but that text box there to help you navigate and let people know, like, hey, this is the heading, this is where you're at right now. That's actually super dope. I didn't even know we could do that on the Macs.
Yep. Yeah, you can do that on Windows as well. So Windows has their own screen readers. This is the VoiceOver is a screen reader that's built into Mac OS, but yeah, all screen readers support that skipping functionality to skip the headings or images or links, right? And that's whatever content that they want to navigate to.
And that's super dope. And because I don't want to forget her question, Brooklyn asked, in what ways has your company made things accessible for employees?
Yeah, that's a great question, Brooklyn. So we have our own internal group. They're called People Accessibility, and that team is responsible for making sure that employees within Apple have an inclusive experience. And this could be both digital and physical. So on the digital side, they make sure that all of our third-party applications that we use internally as employees, they're accessible, things like Box and Slack, et cetera. Making sure that all of the Sorry, I think my AirPods died. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
So yeah, continuing making sure that all of the forms and services that are available to employees are accessible to people with disabilities, making sure that all of our internal websites are accessible. Anything that a user might want to do, if they want to submit a request to be off, they want to look at their paycheck, if they want to order a new badge, for example, all those processes and websites and associated digital content should be accessible. That team handles that. And on the physical side, they also make sure that people have the accommodations that they need. So if I have a physical disability, perhaps I need a special chair, they might send a request to the people group to request that chair. Anything that they need in terms of accommodations or anything to help them, do their job, that would all be handled by that team. So Apple does, quite honestly, the best job I've ever seen of accommodating employees, whether they have disabilities or not. They really go out of their way to make sure that you have an inclusive experience in our internally in our company.
That's very nice. That's very nice to hear, especially because we hear about people talking about all kinds of inclusion. I don't think people understand that when we talk about inclusion, it's not just race or ethnicity. It's also those with disabilities from different backgrounds and everything as well. So just hearing that companies are taking the time to really make sure all employees feel included, that's actually, a very cool thing.
Yeah, no doubt. How much time do we have left on?
We have about 10 minutes left.
10. Okay, cool. I have a bunch of other slides, but I've talked a little bit about my role and what I do. The one thing I'll mention in addition to kind of my day-to-day responsibilities is that, standards are important. We talk about making sure content's accessible, but you might ask yourself, well, who determines that, right? So me, as someone who's been working in this field for a long time, I've developed opinions and understandings of how things should work and, what meets the bar of accessible. And that comes from authoritative bodies, like the W3C is one of them. They create a standard called WCAG. And that standard is used in private industry, public, it's used in higher level educational systems. So whether you're a university or private company, there are requirements that are pulled from global kind of universal standards. So accessibility is not necessarily like, oh, I feel like this is what the experience should be. Many a times those criteria are pulled from existing conformance standards and frameworks that are then adapted to that environment that you're in. So accessibility is not, it can be very subjective, but hopefully it shouldn't be extremely subjective. It should be just like development and design and all these other disciplines, it should be something that's repeatable and consistent and can be extended, not necessarily something that comes from the mind of a single individual. Like, here's what I think it should be.
Right.
So standards are very important for making sure that things are accessible.
Right.
We're all responsible for accessibility. So it's not someone like me who comes along and says, here, I'll make everything that you just developed accessible. Really, it's on the onus of the designer, the developer, the person who's a copy expert, the person who's even if you're just I don't say just, but it's supposed to be a project manager, it's incumbent on you to understand that, accessibility is everyone's responsibility, right? To the extent that your job interfaces with the UI that you're creating. So it's not just accessibility SME, subject matter experts, that are responsible for this. If everyone today suddenly had all the knowledge that accessibility SMEs have, we wouldn't exist. My role wouldn't exist. So the only reason we exist is because there's a lack of understanding and a lack of knowledge when it comes to accessibility expertise. But ideally, people like me shouldn't exist. Everyone should just be making things accessible, because that's part of their job responsibility. Super quick, I know we have a Q&A. Things that you can do today for our emerging developers: definitely think about how different people with different abilities interact with computers and technology. It's not just a mouse and a keyboard. So think about, hey, let me turn on a screen reader. How does a screen reader work? How does VoiceOver work? How might someone who uses their voice to interact with this UI that I've created actually use it? And what are the challenges that they would experience? So consider different input modalities. Definitely implement structure and semantics, which is basically a fancy way of saying that the way that your code visually looks like should match what it looks like under the hood. If something is large and it's a heading, implement the proper semantic structure for that. So actually implement a heading in the code. If I have a link, make sure that that link actually conveys as a link in the code. So this one's very, very deep, but the ultimate takeaway is that how you code things is how it's going to be conveyed to assistive technologies. And it's incredibly important to think about how your underlying code is getting rendered by either the browser or the operating system. And when you test it with the assistive technology, that you get the right experience. If something's a button, but a VoiceOver user doesn't hear that it's a button, it's an issue at the code level that you need to fix at the code level. And related to tip number one, you can do your own accessibility testing. You don't necessarily have to rely on anyone to do that for you. So some simple checks that you can do, let's say you're creating a form, for example, first name, last name, etc. Can I tap to all the elements in the form using my keyboard alone? Can I navigate in a logical way? Like, does my tab order, the order in which I'm tabbing, match the visual order? Can I activate the button in the form to submit it? If I'm creating a widget, can I use it with a keyboard alone? If I'm creating some sort of new experience, thinking about, let me turn this on, let me turn on my VoiceOver screen reader and test with it. Let me navigate this with just my keyboard. Let me see if there's any color contrast issues that I can detect as part of my UI and alleviate those by making sure that my contrast is sufficient. So testing is something that you can do yourself, and there's plenty of resources to help you, but just keep that in mind, right? In your UI, if you're doing testing, which you should definitely be doing as an engineer, part of that testing has to be accessibility testing. Part of that testing has to be, what is the end user experience for people with disabilities? Cool, I'll leave it at that.
Well, we got a couple minutes.
Talked a lot, I apologize.
No, you didn't talk a lot. Again, the people were here to hear you speak, so just thank you again for it. Brooklyn asks another question. Has there been any work on accessibility for younger users, i.e. elementary school aged?
Yeah, accessibility is taken a lot more seriously in upper education, like beginning with high school and college. For middle-aged and younger, middle school age students and younger, typically what will happen is that they will get what's called, I believe it's called an individualized education plan, an IEP, I believe it's called. And that helps determine what those accommodations are. And that might be the first introduction to, hey, you are a person with a cognitive disability, here's some software to help you. And that's when they might start using the software and start understanding how they learn best and what learning techniques are best for them. So yeah, definitely accessibility can start at a very young age. There's some overlap in accessibility and disability service provision. So you have, at least in upper education, you have disability service units where they provide books in alternative formats. If you're like blind, they will provide a book for you in text format in a digital file. If you need a sign language interpreter, they usually have sign language interpreters that will go with students to classes and do sign language interpreting. So a lot of those services are very robust as you get older. But in middle school and younger, sometimes you don't even know that a person has a disability until they've actually been diagnosed. Right? So part of the issue there is performing diagnosis. We see those services becoming more robust over time, but for the most part, students don't get as much support as they would like, probably up until about high school. And that's when they can be a little bit more, they can voice their concerns, they can tell people exactly, actually, I learn best via this method, or actually I'm a Voiceover user and here's how I need my learning materials. I would like them in an accessible format. So as they get older, they can begin to voice those concerns more and more. But yeah, I've heard about, last thing I'll mention is I've heard about some students who just, they get diagnosed with things like, low IQ, or they get placed in certain classes, and all because they didn't have the opportunity to sit down with someone and have be asked, what's the best way that you learn, or describe some of the challenges that you have. Oh, it sounds like you have ADHD, right? And here's some resources to help you with that. So students aren't necessarily yet that mature to voice those concerns or to get support where they might need it, unfortunately.
Wow, that's some really powerful stuff, because especially, we always say, we need to help the youth, but are we talking to the youth? Are we assessing where the youth is? And are we doing our own research to help them? So I think that's a very powerful statement right there. Just how do we go about diagnosing them and really helping them learn? Because it shouldn't take until they're high school. We should be doing, trying to do a better job of identifying them.
Yes, sir.
Dominic McPaul says, I love closing off for all these action steps. Before we go, because I know we only have a couple of minutes left and I don't want to take too much of your time left, but a question from
I'm cool to hang out after. Yep.
Oh, okay.
Cool to hang out extra. Yeah, I've got time.
Ecia Jenkins said, any suggestions for transition to tech accessibility focus from a non-traditional background?
Yeah, that's a great question. The first thing that I would recommend is to learn how these technologies work. So one of the themes, I'm sure y'all have discussed this before, is that there's no, back in the day, you'd have, you need to get a computer science degree, and then you need to get this job. And then that's not necessarily how the world works now. You right now can learn anything that you want, right? You have the internet, you have very developed communities around, these subject matters. You can learn this yourself. You don't need anyone to sit down. You don't need to get a certification. You don't need to go to school for it. There's no accessibility course that you can take right now in higher level education that I'm aware of, at least when I was going to school. So accessibility is something that a lot of times is self-taught or comes from experience working with people with disabilities, or you're in a job, you're in an engineering role, and someone says to you hey, we got a complaint from a blind user that our UI doesn't work the way it's supposed to. We need to figure this out. And so you start taking steps, learning sort of how those technologies work and what you need to do. So my suggestions are, number one, become an autodidact. Become someone who learns on their own. And learning can take many forms. It can be watching videos, it can be doing tutorials, it could be using these technologies, it could be building a robust GitHub profile that has some nice accessibility projects in there, or developing tools around accessibility, like creating your own color contrast analyzer. Right? That goes a long way towards developing expertise, I think, in this field. Definitely networking. I have people that add me all the time on LinkedIn, and that kind of want to chat through.
Can you drop your LinkedIn too in the chat so people can connect with you and everything?
Yeah, I'm not sure how do I posted. Is there a way that I can post it? I don't see an input box when I click on comments.
It should be right there, but you know what? I found you, so let me.
You can search for me. Yeah, it's just Raheem Abdi on LinkedIn.
Like I said, you've been given a lot of information, and I know there's going to be people who want to make sure to connect with you and just really ask for your expertise as well. So I'm posting it right now. This is right here.
Yep, appreciate you. Thank you. So definitely add other people that work in accessibility. We love to reach out to people that are interested in the field, that want to learn more. And a lot of times, hey, I just graduated, I'm looking for an opportunity. We can connect you with, opportunities that might exist. Accessibility is a relatively niche, small group. So as you connect with people, you'll find out more about what they do, and they'll be able to connect you with others that are also in the space. And lastly, I would say, Isia, don't feel shy, right? So don't feel like, oh, I can't do this, or it's too difficult, or you feel discouraged before you even start. So many of the best accessibility specialists and advocates and engineers that I've met don't have a tech background. Many of them have disabilities. For example, my mentor that taught me everything I know about accessibility was, he's a blind director of accessibility currently at Thomas Reuters. He was at Ohio State, but he taught me everything that I know. He doesn't come from a tech background. One of the smartest guys I know. So put yourself out there, put the onus on yourself to learn, and never give up is what I would say. Be persistent.
And that was good. And so I just want to be respectful of everybody else's time as well, because I know we said from 6 to 7. Thank you for going a little bit over and everything, and really giving information. Brooklyn has laid out a survey that I hope everyone will take a chance to, fill out. But once again, I want to thank Raheem for just, coming out here and really giving just a good talk about accessibility, even taking us through a live demo and showing us what you need to do to really be in this space, to not only be successful, but to have empathy and compassion. Because as I started with this segment, I want to end that segment as well. Have empathy. We're all going through something. We all need a little bit of help. And one way Raheem helps is by making sure his content and whatever his company is doing is making sure that everyone has access to it. So please just walk in empathy. Walk, in your purpose and in empathy. And that's just what I want to leave y'all with tonight. We have a whole week full of events coming on. I want y'all to take the time to reach out to Raheem, connect with him. Super dope guy. And we look forward to seeing y'all tomorrow.